All right, welcome back to an exclusive edition, episode number 5 of The Breakdown. Joined by a very special guest here today, Minnesota Twins general manager and one of my favorite guys in baseball, Terry Ryan. Terry, how are we doing today?
Good, Brandon. Thanks a lot for having me.
I'm really glad to have you. I'm a little upset we couldn't have Cole DeVries with us, the usual guy that's on my co-pilot chair, a guy you're obviously very familiar with as well. But I think we'll do pretty good in the meantime here. We got a half-hour runtime, a little special edition, so let's get after it.
Yeah, we'll be able to make it without Cole, and someday we'll hook up with him.
There you go. So, Terry, a lot of people don't. What people don't know about you, maybe from Twins territory, is that your days in the Twins organization actually go back much further than just in a front office role. You were a left-handed pitcher in the Twins system in the 70s, if I remember correctly.
Yeah, that would be correct. The early 70s, I was drafted out of high school down in Janesville, Wisconsin, and signed a contract in 1973 and pitched in the system for about 4+ years. I was hurt a lot, so for the most part, it didn't work out. I didn't do a lot of the things that I should have done to progress in my baseball career. I messed around and wasted some people's time. And ultimately, I got released, which I deserved. And then I went back to school and got a degree and then got back into the game with the Mets in 1980.
And my understanding, actually, there's a funny, is it a big fella story that goes back to the day when he was your trainer and maybe he wasn't quite aware of...
Wayne Hadaway, who you're talking about, was the trainer for the Orlando club in Double-A, which I was on. And I was going to pitch that particular night, and he was rubbing my elbow and rubbing my shoulder and getting me ready and so forth. So after about close to 20 minutes or so, I said, Wayne, you did a heck of a job. Unfortunately, I'm left-handed. So he had the wrong arm, so we started over again. But I've been with Wayne Hadaway since actually 1973 right through today, which has been a long time, and he's been quite a valued member of this organization behind the scenes.
Yeah, it's pretty clear how he's viewed by the players and the front office staff. He's obviously one of those guys that when he's not around, you almost feel not quite right because he's that ubiquitous face around that clubhouse. So you got into, I guess, you had was it a physical education degree from the University of Wisconsin?
Yeah, basically I got an education degree, and I had every intention of thinking I was going to coach and also teach. And I did some of that as a substitute teacher when I was working for the Mets, so I got a little bit of a taste for it. But the more I got into the scouting and into the Mets organization and the deeper I got, the more realization I had that this is my path.
Yeah, I don't suspect there's a lot of GMs that have a background in education, maybe finance, or am I wrong?
Well, it's varied. There are some GMs that don't have a college degree, basically. There are some that would be lawyers, for instance. There are some that are ex-major league players. There are some that are ex-farm directors. And it doesn't necessarily have to be the same path to get into the chair of a GM. You have to have some luck and certainly some qualifications. But for the most part, you can be pretty much anybody that ultimately graduates into that type of title.
So you made the jump from the Mets to the Twins. When did that happen and what went into that?
Well, I got released in 76, or right about that year, somewhere in there. Mm-hmm. I went back and got my degree, and in 80, I ended up getting my first job with the Mets in scouting. I was the area scout for Minnesota, Wisconsin, Illinois, Iowa, et cetera, right there in the Midwest. And 80 through 85, that was my job. And then in 86, Andy MacPhail brought me up here to the Minnesota Twins once again as the scouting director.
Now, this is kind of a fun story for me being a Roseau native, but I was at a baseball reunion, I want to say it was 2 or 3 summers ago, and a man by the name of Kerry Taylor went to that high school, somebody I'm sure that you maybe remember at least a little bit. And anyway, the old baseball coach was auctioning off packets of stats from previous years. It was like a charity deal. So Kerry won whatever his senior year was, whether it was, I think it was 88 or something, 89. And inside there, he showed me this business card, and it had your name on it, and then the Metrodome address, and I think it said scout or maybe farm director. I don't remember exactly what it said. What was the story of your involvement with Kerry Taylor? Because I was led to believe it was around the Lions All-Star game when you guys got him signed.
That is correct. Kerry was in the Lions All-Star game out in Chaska, and I always took the effort to get out there and scout that. I was the scouting director at the time. And I'm sitting there with Angelo Giuliani, the heralded scout with the Twins for many, many years up here in this territory. And Kerry came in to pitch, and he was touching 93 and 4 and in that area, which is quite high for a high school boy. And he went undrafted. The draft was like a week prior to the Lions All-Star game, so he was free to be signed. And the next day, I flew to Grand Forks and then drove to Roseau. I met with the family, and I met with Kerry. And I came out of there with a signature, and we got him signed for a sizable amount. And he went out and was with us for about 4 years. And unfortunately, we lost him to the Padres in a Rule 5 draft about 4 years or 5 years into his pro career. And he pitched in the big leagues for a pretty decent amount of time. I'm very proud of that signing. I'm very proud of Kerry. He was in the ballpark here last week, so I've kept in touch with him. He's doing quite well. So that's one of those good scouting stories. Angelo Giuliani and I, and there was one other scout in the building, and we had to beat him to the punch because I know he was pushing to sign him as well.
So you met Mr. and Mrs. Terry Taylor, both the parents.
Yes.
Kerry's, it's kind of a funny family, actually. But anyway, so kind of inexplicable that he went undrafted, though, throwing like that. I mean,
from Roseau, Brandon, you don't get many from Roseau, number one, but it's not unusual when a kid from the northern schools, especially up that far, where they play 10 games maybe, and obviously
very
it's still
limited
cold. And
participation.
you know, he's a pretty good athlete. I'm guessing he's coming off of some kind of winter sport. I don't recall if he played basketball or if he was a hockey player, but usually those guys, they don't start to develop that type of arm strength until we get into closer to late May and June and so forth, and we just happen to be at the right place at the right time. He had committed to the University of Wisconsin, and that was back in the days when Wisconsin had baseball.
They had a few Roseau guys, too, actually. I think they had recruited in that era, and so you knew with the Wisconsin commit, you were obviously going after a pretty good guy.
Well, I knew that he committed there. He was probably on about a quarter or a half ride. But I don't know if Wisconsin knew what they had either, because they probably hadn't seen quite as much velocity as we did that particular day. And granted, most pitchers that come into that All-Star game are amped up pretty good, and they probably are up a little bit harder than they actually settle in at. But when you see that type of velocity with the type of frame that Kerry possessed, it was certainly worth the flight up to Roseau.
Yeah, he still struck me out a couple years ago in that alumni game, throwing probably high 80s. So I definitely was impressed with what I saw there. Now, moving back towards your role as a GM, you stepped down after the 2007 season, if I'm not mistaken. And did you ever at that point envision a scene where you'd be sitting in that chair again?
I didn't. I thought this was going to be the end in 2007. I pretty much had convinced myself and possibly my wife. I don't know about my wife, but I thought maybe that was going to be the end of my GM duties. I still was working full-time for the Twins in various capacities, and ultimately they asked me to come back, and it was unfortunate circumstances with Billy, who he and I are still very close, and I felt horrible about it. And I guess, as it turns out, Bill's still with us, which is a great thing, and here I am still here, and it's been a struggle, Brendan. There's no doubt. We've struggled here for 4 years now, and we've got to get this thing going. We're headed in the right direction, and we're certainly playing games here that mean an awful lot to us in the month of August, and we got to continue that front here as we approach September.
Now, this is your fourth season back at the helm. What is different from the first time to this time specifically?
That's the very easiest question I'm going to get is we have moved from the Metrodome to Target Field since I left and came back. And obviously the revenue, the payroll has jumped, the attendance has jumped. We had a tremendous year when Bill took over in 2009 and even better, I think, in 10. And he did a nice job there. We had one bad year, and that was 11, I believe. But for the most part, the biggest change, certainly the payrolls and the salaries have gone up tremendously. But other than that, here we've got this fantastic ballpark and facility, and everything is in good shape for this organization for years to come. And most of it surrounds us with this ballpark that we're playing in.
Does that increased payroll make your job easier? Because, and the reason I ask is, in the times when you were a little bit hamstrung, you didn't get into any big contracts, and so you never got into a situation where you had a guy that was, a payroll liability. How does the different payrolls make your job differently between the first time and the second time?
It makes it much easier. There's no doubt. We can get into the mix certainly in the winter for some of these guys that would get big tickets, but even back in the day when we were a little bit hamstrung with payrolls, I still had issues. Even when we were middle of the road contract guys, if they didn't pan out, I was in tough shape there because I more often than not had to do something with that contract. Now, excuse me. Nowadays, we have an opportunity, for instance, during the waiver claim situations that the month of August presents, we can get involved in that. We can get involved in free agency. We certainly can get involved with trades with guys that have contracts that years past we wouldn't be able to afford. So it's been much easier to do this job, even though we have struggled.
Is Target Field a place that players want to play when you get into the winter and you start selling the team to a free agent?
They'll want to play here if you're competitive with the offer, and this is a good place to pitch. I think that's around the league and the industry that this is a pretty good place to pitch. I also think that our reputation has a good, reputable tone about it when people talk about playing for the Minnesota Twins, especially when we are competitive. But we have good spring training facilities. We have good affiliates. We have certainly the major league facility to sell. If we are somewhat competitive with that offer with years or dollars or both, there has not been that much of a problem in enticing a guy to come here. Most players, and when they get to that stature, they want dollars, they want years, and they want the ability to win, and we can and should be able to provide all three.
Do you feel it was easier to get guys when you were rolling really well at the Metrodome than it was when maybe the leaner years here the last couple seasons? Or is Target Field still that trump card that has kind of favored you in the last couple seasons?
It wasn't easy to get people at the Metrodome no matter how good we were because it wasn't a great place to pitch. It was not a great place for people that had bad backs and sore knees and so forth because of the turf. And they always had a fair idea or either the stereotype that we are always hamstrung with dollars. And no matter how many people, and we drew over 3 million people over there, and we still had issues with our payroll. So all those things combined, it's much easier to get a guy here than the Metrodome, no matter how much success, even coming off World Series wins.
So one thing I wanted to ask you is to describe the general manager role, because I think there's a perception, whether it's from us, you may be watching the movie Moneyball and seeing Brad Pitt playing Billy Beane, and it's all the different aspects. You obviously have people that help you with certain things, whether it's getting guys signed, finalizing contracts, following the draft, and all that. Like, what is your specific role on a day-to-day basis, would you say?
Well, I take full responsibility for the things that go wrong, for sure. If we we sign a player and he's no good, ultimately it's going to fall in my lap. But between budgets and contracts and international scouting and amateur domestic scouting and our farm department and affiliates and dealing with the media and dealing with ownership and so forth, that's kind of falls underneath the umbrella of the general manager. And then, of course, the staff and the players and all the people that are involved, the medical people up here and the trainers and so forth, those are underneath the GM. Now, the farm department, Brad Stiles is the director of our minor league operations, and he takes care of all the affiliates per se, and people in that area report to him. In the scouting department, it's Darren Johnson and Mike Radcliffe and Vern Falwell. We have three scouting departments. We have the amateur, we have the pro, and we have the international. They're in charge, but ultimately I am in charge of those guys, so it all funnels up to me eventually, and then I get it to either Dave St. Peter or Jim Pohlad. And we have a pretty good idea in this organization of delegation, and we also have a pretty good chain of command, and we have very good communication, and that's why people stay here, I think, for the most part. This is a good place to work. I mean, we don't pay our people maybe more than some, but we certainly are competitive with salaries, but we pay our people to do their job, and we let them do their job, and if they screw up, they hear about it, and if they do well, they also hear about it, and I think that's why people kind of hang around here.
Now, you and your nearest allies in the front office come from kind of a varied set of backgrounds, but all seem to have come from non-traditional backgrounds. I'm talking about Rob and Jack and where they were hired from. Is that a source of pride for you, for those guys to have come from, I don't, because wasn't Jack hired from the ballpark staff, and so too was Rob a number of years ago?
Yeah, Rob was in the media department, actually, and I was here when we did hire Rob into the baseball operations department, and that was a long time ago, probably 20-some years. So he came through the media, and then he gravitated toward the baseball, which is not unusual. Jack started in the ticket sales and office, and then he got into the baseball department as an assistant to the GM. And then, of course, he's a bright guy, and now he's heading the analytical department, which he's doing a nice job of, and he's got people underneath him. And for the most part, like Bill Smith, he was a minor league general manager for the Appleton Foxes back in the day in the early 80s. But he did go to the commissioner's office for a while. He worked for the White Sox for a while. Ironically, Bill Smith was a French major in college. He is trilingual. He also speaks English, Spanish, and now he has that French in his pocket. So it's amazing what he can do, and he's quite an asset to this organization. But it is unusual. Mike Radcliffe, of course, I think Mike was a journalism major down at the University of Missouri. But, our scouts and the people that are out in that world that bring in talent, you can have those guys from any walk of life. If you know how to evaluate, you're going to be a valuable piece to any major league organization.
So there's still hope for me as a journalism major?
There is. Yep, there certainly is. We've got a few journalism majors running around in this organization, and for me, that who cares what you majored in college? You just have to have a feel for the game. There are people that go different walks of life, and ultimately you wonder how they got there, but somehow you land on your feet and get to the place that you ultimately belong.
Your interaction with the media, I would call atypical from a positive standpoint. I think that's, you make yourself available or someone from your office available before every single home game. Do you suspect many teams do that, and why is that important to you?
Well, I want to be accessible, number one, and I want to be transparent, and you guys have a job to do, and I want to make sure that there's somebody available to help you get the information you need. Now, I don't think anybody else does that in the game because I've been told that, and they think I'm nuts for doing it, but I don't believe it's a thing that is bothersome to anybody. We meet at 6:30 every day at home, and we do the same on the road. I don't see you on the road, Brandon, but we do the same thing on the road.
I'd like to travel, but we're just not there yet.
But we do the same thing on the road as we do at home, and whether it's me or Rob Antony, we meet every day, and sometimes there's 15 and sometimes there's 5, but every media member that's attending that game that night can get in on the information, and if you have a particular question you want answered, at least I'll try to. Sometimes I lose my temper a little bit here or there, and I know I upset some of the writers once in a while because I might call you out a little bit, but it works both ways, and everybody seems, once we leave that table, everything's in pretty good order.
I think there's something to be said for getting out in front of the message, too, I think there's something to be said for getting out in front of the message and kind of controlling the message in the sense that if you and the media are on good terms, there's less likely to be hurt feelings if the media misinterprets something or says something that you don't enjoy.
I appreciate that a lot. As you know, you guys protect me on occasion. I might say something that I don't particularly want out there, and the next day I'll look for it. And you guys know I might have said something that I shouldn't, and I have been protected, and that doesn't go unnoticed. And that's another reason that I make sure that I show up there, because you guys have been good to me, and you're not always good, but you're fair. And that's the way it ought to be on the other end. I ought to be good to you guys, and I ought to be fair to you guys, and it's worked out to this point. There's maybe come a day where somebody gets mad enough where, all right, we got to halt this thing. It's not working, but I don't see it in the near future because I have a long-term relationship with almost all you guys and women. We've got plenty of gals that come in as well, and it's a pretty good deal.
Yeah, and so the one thing that I enjoyed most about those scrums my first year covering the team on a regular basis, and something that you probably got tired of talking about because it's not really your thing, but the minor leagues. I like asking about the minors, and so I kind of want to get into that a little bit here. And the one thing I want to ask is, how has increased fan awareness of the minor leagues changed basically the landscape of baseball, whether it's on Twitter, social media? Everybody's clamoring for the next big thing. And you've already promoted your top 2 prospects this year, and all people can talk about now is Jose Barrios. Does that change how you feel about your job at all? How has that changed as your job has evolved?
Well, everybody is aware of the minor league players, and especially your top 10 or so, which is a good thing. It gives the minor league players exposure, which they desperately were in need of here. And that has changed over the last 15 years for sure. And between Baseball America and all the blogs and the internet sites and so forth, those guys are getting plenty of attention. It doesn't change my decision-making because I always try to do what's right for the player, not necessarily what's right for the club. And sometimes I have to hold a guy back just because I know he's not ready. We'll get lucky on occasion if we push a guy, but More often than not, this game has a knack in humbling anybody. And if a guy's not ready, eventually it's going to catch up to him. So I usually try to do what's right for the player. Now, the Hicks thing, we all can revert back to that decision. It wasn't a good one, and it blew up. And thankfully, the young man has evolved here and started to play the way we hoped he would about 2 years ago. But, getting back to the fans' interest, that's good. But the fans' wishes sometimes I can't go with because I have to ultimately do what's right for the player.
Now, the way I explain it when people ask me about it, and tell me if this is crazy or tell me if this is something you think of, is it doesn't necessarily matter if player X at AA is better than player X in the big leagues, but is player X in AA as good as he can be? It isn't about promoting the 25 best guys, but you have to have guys at current parts in their evolution that can not only contribute for you, but can reach their ceilings.
Yeah, there's a process now. There are guys in A-ball and AA with better stuff or better skills than some of the players on this ball club. And you say, well, why aren't they up there? Well, they don't have the wherewithal. They don't have the experience. They don't have the adjustability. All of a sudden, they start failing up here and they panic. The guys that are up here and have been around, they've earned that right to be here, number one. And in due time, those guys with those great skills down below, and Buxton's one of them, Brennan, he's got tremendous skills. He's probably got better skills than any player on this team. Running, throwing, fielding possibly. He can do all those things, but he's not ready with that bat quite yet. And we brought him up, and we were hoping to get lucky. Unfortunately, he got hurt, which was my biggest fear, and it happened. But in time, those guys with the good skills, if they have the makeup, and that's one of the bigger concerns I have with players and when you promote them, is their mental maturity and whether or not they are mentally tough and can handle failure and all that stuff that comes with playing with these guys up here.
Now, the one guy that I brought up, when you drafted Jose Barrios, did you envision him moving as quickly as he has?
Yeah, we did. And not so much the day of the draft, but once we got him out there and saw him and see how he reacted. But he has a work ethic that's better than almost anybody we have. He's got talent. He's got 3 pitches or 4 pitches. He's got athleticism. He's got that will to succeed, and he certainly wants to move fast. You've heard him talk.
Did you know about his work ethic beforehand?
Yeah, I think our people did. They did a nice job on him down in Puerto Rico leading up to the draft, which is a responsibility of the area scouts. They should be able to tell us what kind of work ethic and what kind of mental makeup and what kind of off-field habits he has, and if they don't, then we probably have to find a new area scout because that's their job.
That makes sense. What has Max Kepler's evolution looked like? He's become a completely different player this season.
He has. He's had a breakout year, and we've been waiting for that from this kid. He's grown into that body, which is one change. He's a man now instead of a boy in a good baseball body. He's a man in a man's body. He's come a million miles. We brought him over here when he was 16. He had to go to high school across the street in Fort Myers before we could really get him full-time. He got his degree in high school from South Fort Myers down there. But he is one of those guys that he's big. He is deceivingly strong. He can run. He can play left, center, right, and first, which is good. He's a left-handed hitter. He's had some arm problems, which concern me because we haven't had him out in the outfield as much as I'd like because of his sore left arm. But for the most part, his bat has come alive, and he's hanging in very well versus left-handed pitchers. He's driving the ball to all fields. He's got some power, but he hasn't really developed the type of power that I think he will have. But he's one of our better guys.
That's scary for a guy that's slugging like 550 that you think he has more power left inside him, which is great. We have to wrap up the minor league segment here because you can't talk about the minor leagues without Buxton and Sano. Even though Sano is up here, I want to know, in your opinion, how much did their injuries affect their timelines? And specifically, how might it have been different if they had been lower down the totem pole and gotten hurt like they did versus, both of them were getting closer, maybe middle of their evolution towards the big leagues. If it had been lower on the totem pole, how might that have been differently?
Well, it would have been different because they both would have been 18 or 19 instead of 20, 21, 22. But both of them lost a year of their career basically here recently. And I would have thought Sano last year probably would have surfaced up here if the affiliates and his process wouldn't have been interrupted with the Tommy John. He probably would have surfaced last year. And Buxton, he's not too far behind. He's a little, this guy, Sano's got a way about him and discipline with the bat. Buxton's still learning some of that, how to lay off that slider and things of that nature. And if you see a guy in the minor leagues that can handle the bat and handle the strike zone discipline and take a walk and not get excited up there with the bases loaded, no outs, you can probably rest assured that he's going to come up here and give you a competitive at-bat.
Perfect. And we're transitioning to the major league side. I'm at 25 minutes, so I'll roll through it real fast. Still good then with time?
Yeah.
All right. So anyway, for the third segment here, I'd like to talk about the majors, obviously the team that you watch on every given night. I want to ask you, and you can be as coy as you want, but on a scale of 1 to 10, how surprised have you been at how the team has played so far this season?
Not quite as surprised as people think, because I thought when we left spring training, even with the issue with Urban Santana coming up positive, I still thought we were a pretty decent club. We had more depth in our minor league system that was close to being helpful, and we've seen that with certainly Rosario and Sano and Trevor May, and some of those other guys that have come out of our system that have helped us. So I guess, I would be right around that 5. I felt pretty good that we're going to be competitive. I'm not so sure that I would have picked us to have 9-10 games over 500 there right before the break or so, and we've struggled as of late, but I didn't expect us to struggle either. I think we had enough here. We had a veteran starting staff, which set the tone for the first half. When you get that starting rotation ironed out to some extent, you have a chance, and that's what happened. They carried us a little bit, and then, they're struggling as of late, and you see what happens.
For me, the surprise came from the fact that, I don't want to slight Torrey Hunter, who we'll talk about next, but for that first half run that you had, it was by and large a lot of the same guys you had the season before, and I don't know, that maybe is a feather in Torrey's cap, maybe a feather in Paul Molitor's cap, or those two as a leadership role, guys holding leadership roles. But it surprised me to see a team that was largely constructed the same as last year to just go out and play that much better.
Yeah, I can see where you'd say that, but there also were other contributors to this situation. And, Perkins being 29 for 29, of course, I'm not sure that was unexpected because he had a heck of a year last year. But for the most part, each one of those guys that came back, and Plouffe is a prime example, he's raised his game up. His defense has gotten so much better. Now, one of the reasons that we won a little bit more consistently in the first half, our defense was pretty good. The outfield came together defensively. We struggled early. We didn't have quite the range in one of the corners, and we were playing musical chairs in center field to some extent. And all of a sudden, we've got pretty well a set 9, and we started playing well defensively. Even with the struggles with Santana. We still did a nice job. The pitchers did a nice job. We picked up the ball, and we didn't give them extra outs, and consequently it developed into some more wins.
Well, everybody wanted to know, and maybe this didn't trickle down to you, but to me, definitely, I kept hearing about, why didn't the Twins address outfield defense in the offseason? And for me, it was simple. You knew the guys coming up were going to be able to go get it, and you've seen that from every single one of the young guys that you've brought up.
Well, I traveled through our minor leagues so much that I knew Santana probably is going to move into short, but I also had some hope that, okay, we still have Hicks. We got Buxton in the wings. Let's hope that we brought in Schaefer and we have Robinson and so forth. I think we could stem the tide until some of these guys graduate, and they did. But on the other side, Rosario can play defense. It's just a matter of if he was ready to hit up here, and he's shown that he can do that as well. So we didn't mess with that too much because of Rosario. Having Torrey in right field, we plugged that gap a little bit, or a lot, I should say. And it's turned out to be a pretty good defensive outfield for sure. And with Plouffe emerging and certainly Dozier over there and Maurer at first, and Suzuki's doing a decent job behind the plate, we need to make sure that shortstop was firmed up. And defense hasn't been the basic issue at short. It's been how much we're going to get offensively.
You mentioned Torrey Hunter. I want to talk about him for just a brief second here. Has he given you everything you could have imagined?
Yeah, he has. Last year I stated that he had a good year for Detroit.
He really did.
Like he's coming out of nowhere here. He had a number of good years with the Tigers and the Angels. And if we were evaluating him to say, well, let's just say he has somewhat of the same year. Well, he got off the first half. He was having somewhat of the same year, and I think we're going to rest him a little bit more here as we go through the second half to make sure we keep him strong and fresh. But for the most part, I think he's done a wonderful job in the clubhouse, in the dugout. But just as importantly, he's produced on the field.
What has he done for Aaron Hicks?
I'm guessing he's in his hip pocket. There's no doubt that Aaron Hicks and Torrey have a great relationship and friendship and respect. I know Aaron has a lot of respect for what Torrey has to offer, and you can talk to a player all you want, but if he's not willing to put it into play, and I'm guessing, and between our coaching staff, our manager, even last year with Gardy showed a lot of patience with Aaron Hicks. He gave him every opportunity. It didn't work the way we were hoping, and ultimately, it may be a different voice once in a while. We'll let it kick in, but I suspect that Torrey had a great amount of influence on Aaron Hicks to realize, listen, man, you get so many chances in this game, you better start taking advantage of one of them.
Yeah, I agree with that 100%. And I was a Hicks advocate until, at this point now everybody loves what he's doing on the field. Another guy that people weren't quite sure what you were going to get out of this season was Trevor May. And I think the one thing that's impressed me as an outsider most is how he's completely revamped who he is as a strike thrower. And so could you contextualize a little bit about what it means for a guy who's been in 775 minor league innings, another 100 in the big leagues, and he's throwing strikes at a rate he's never before done? Like, what does that mean for an organization? Is that props to somebody specifically?
Well, for me, you watch his arm action, you watch his mechanics. He is a pretty good athlete, and I think maybe it was just those freshman jitters when he came up. Obviously, he really struggled throwing over the plate his first 3 or 4 starts. That was a year ago. And this guy has been around the minor leagues for a long time, which is, and he's still young. He's probably 25 now, if that. But he knows what it's all about. He's struggled in the minor leagues quite a bit, actually. And, there are a lot of questions whether or not he was going to emerge as the starter we traded for. We traded a good player in Ben Revere for him. Obviously, we got Worley as well. But Trevor May, in the minor leagues, it seemed like he always needed 2 stops at each level. And that happens with players. And, 2 stops at New Britain and 2 stops at Rochester and probably 2 stops at Clearwater or wherever he was with the Phillies back in the day. But sometimes that's the case. And high school pitchers are a lot like that, Brandon. It takes them a while. It's very rare where one of those high school guys just skips right through the minor league system unscathed. And Trevor May, we never lost faith that he'd be a good major league pitcher. It's just a matter of when.
I want to come full circle with just a couple things as you move towards the end of this season and moving to next. Does that sound good?
Yeah.
Okay. So people look at what you've got going on position-wise. Obviously, Byron Buxton is somebody fans want to see, and that means your outfield's getting pretty full. You've got a couple capable guys that can play third base. Some people would say you have a logjam. Do you say not really a logjam or even a good problem to have, or how would you? What's your analysis of the situation?
Well, last year people were telling us we're going to have a logjam with Vargas and Santana.
Exactly.
Look what happens, Brandon. It just doesn't work on paper. It looks good, and you talk about it, and boy, they got a logjam and they got depth, and well, it doesn't work that way. Unfortunately, you have a lot of disappointments. You have injuries. You have things where you have to juggle your positions and so forth. And you've got roster restrictions. You just can't keep all these guys either, so you have to make room. But we're in decent shape, and we've got certainly position players that look like they have ceilings. We've got to get some more depth and numbers in that pitching staff. Pitching is the thing that pretty much sets the tone on whether or not you could succeed or not. So we need to get some starting pitching specifically. We've done a decent job in that relief area. There's many of those guys down below that we think are going to be decent. Now, a lot of those guys have struggled.
Right.
And I'm not sure why that is, but they have. We've got arms down there that can run it up there pretty good if you're looking at radar readings. And people in this market are anxious to see some of those guys that can throw hard. We do have them. And it's just a matter of those guys learning a little bit about command. We don't ask them to be pinpoint, but they certainly can't go into a game and walk the leadoff hitter and expect to get through an inning without giving up anything. But we're in decent shape. But believe me, we got good problems if we have any problems.
And you hinted at this a little bit, and this is one of the last things I want to ask is, do you anticipate then a busy off season for you guys?
Well, your busy off season usually is one of those where you've got all kinds of holes to fill. We don't have all kinds of holes to fill now. We've got issues, there's no question, and we will be active. Now, whether it's one of those winters where you go out and make 8 changes, I don't know if that's going to be the case with this ball club. I've never done that in my life, and I've always tried to get the guys from the system up, and it's worked for the most part in the day. And sometimes you got to go out and make a move, and we've got to get Irvin Santana, we got to get Ricky Nolasco going, Obviously those are two big pieces of this pitching staff as we move forward. Phil Hughes is hurt now, and those are our three veteran pitchers, and that's an issue. We got to make sure that we have starting pitching for sure.
The last thing I want to ask you for a wrap here is this. How much longer do you want to do this?
That's not hard to answer. This is a great job.
It's got to be.
I got a fantastic job, and I've been around this organization for over 30 years now, and I don't see just the Minnesota Twins. I've been with them forever. I don't see much happening in any other market or area, and it's just a matter of, number one, whether or not ownership feels confident that I could get the job done. And obviously my health was an issue here at one point. My health is not an excuse anymore. I don't have any more issues unless something comes up in one of these annual evaluations I have at the Mayo Clinic. But I have a lot of energy. I have a lot of interest. I have a lot of will. I like kind of where we're headed here. We're not certainly out of the woods yet by any stretch. It'd be nice to make a good run in September with this ball club and have everybody feeling pretty good as we go into the fall and the winter, and then I'd feel pretty good about it.
Yeah, re-energize you, re-energize the city. I want to say a big thank you to you and the organization for putting us up here and allowing us to have this chat with you. Hopefully we can do it again sometime.
Yeah, this is good. I appreciate it, and we covered some ground here that I'm not normally used to covering.
Well, good. I hope it wasn't kind of put you on edge or anything like that.
No.
Okay,
don't worry
good.
About that.
Well, that's a wrap. That's the 5th edition of The Breakdown. Thanks for joining us. Catch us next week when we bring Cole back into the fold. For Terry Ryan, Patrick Disher, and everyone at the Alive and Social Network, this is Brandon Warren thanking you for joining us on The Breakdown.